Hello and welcome back to Not Overthinking. Taimur, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I was caught off guard this morning by the clocks. They moved forwards an hour, and I didn't know that. So
Oh,
I ended
okay.
up waking up at 11 o'clock, well, just before 11, thinking, man, what the hell happened? Like, why did I sleep so much? And then Mimi told me that the clocks went forwards. So that was a surprise, but I'm over it. How about
But you
you?
didn't have a bicker because I woke up at 9:30 and I woke up feeling surprisingly refreshed. And then I only realized like an hour later that the clocks have gone forward, so it means I lost out on an hour of sleep.
Oh, nice.
So you
Good
wake
for
up
you.
without an alarm. Is that your style?
No, I had an alarm set for 9, and then I turned it off and went back to bed. That's my style. I
Ah,
don't know what your style is.
no, fair play.
How are you?
I'm good. I am good. It's been an interesting week.
Ready?
Before I get into that, I just want to mention that, so surprise, surprise, this podcast is brought to you by Brilliant. Taimur, what is Brilliant?
Brilliant is the best way to teach yourself maths, physics, or computer science online. They have a bunch of lessons and classes on a bunch of topics about this stuff, including sort of more vogue things like cryptocurrencies and how all that stuff works. It's really very good. It's probably like the one of the very few legit online maths resources that properly teach you maths. So check. What do people have to do? Brilliant.org/not overthinking.
Exactly. And the first 200 people to hit that link get 20% off the annual premium subscription. What do you mean it's a legit way to teach you maths?
It doesn't just focus on the mechanical aspects of like, here's the quadratic formula. Now you just like apply this to all these 20 equations, and that's that's your maths done for the day. It's not like that.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. It's engaging, interactive, and I've been enjoying the cryptocurrency course recently. It's helped me understand all about cryptographic hash functions and how Bitcoin works, which has been fun. And at the moment, I'm working through one of their algorithms courses as well because I want to learn more about algorithms, and it's just kind of fun. I've not quite appreciated. It's like when I was applying to uni, I was actually torn between medicine and computer science, and I feel like the algorithmy kind of here's a problem. How might you solve it using coding? Is like a really cool thing that I wish I'd done more of when I was younger.
Yeah, it's
But yeah,
fun.
thanks Brilliant for sponsoring this episode. Brilliant.org/not overthinking to get your free trial to try it out. I've had I had a bit of a roller coaster this last hour or so because you know how I've been thinking of going back into medicine in a part-time capacity.
Have you?
I made a video about it. You clearly haven't seen the video.
Damn, all right. You
I'm
also made
gonna
a video about how you're moving to the US.
That was a long time ago, so leave me alone. But I'm going back to medicine in a part-time capacity, and
But you are. You're definitely doing it.
yeah, and like I signed up for the locum bank at my local hospital. Locum meaning just like extra shifts that you can take on whenever you like, really. And the paperwork has been just taking ages to organize because like one of the medical staffing people is on maternity leave and the other one was off sick, and like it's basically been like 3 months since I've sent the paperwork in for stuff to be organized. But we have a WhatsApp group, which I've been in since like 2018 when I first started working at that hospital, where like loads of doctors are in this WhatsApp group, and the medical staffing people run the WhatsApp group, and they just post whenever they need urgent locum cover. And so I saw a message this morning saying we're looking for a junior emergency department cover tonight. You know, the rates are escalated, i.e., we'll pay you more money for doing it. You know, we're
Nice.
absolutely desperate. That was the vibe of the message. So I messaged the person being like, hey, my paperwork is still being processed, but if you can manage to do it in the next like 12 hours, I'm happy to do the shift. And then she was like, oh my God, this is so good. I'm going to speak to the medical director. I'm going to kind of get this authorized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was like, I was gearing myself up emotionally to do a shift from 10 p.m. till 8 a.m. tonight. And then I got an email from her a few minutes later, like about half an hour later, being like, right, I've spoken to some people. We can't let you do the shift until the final paperwork and criminal records check and stuff is actually cleared. Whereas initially what she implied was we could just get authorization from above and it would be legit.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's good in a way. Like I kind of felt that sense of like, oh, this feels scary because I haven't been in a hospital for the last 8 months.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? When you feel the fear, you do it anyway. And so I did it, and it's not my fault it didn't work out. So I feel good. I feel like I did my
Yeah.
bit for trying to contribute to the NHS, and now it's the system's fault for being
Yeah.
slow with the paperwork.
Nice. You've done your bit. It's like when you when you phone someone up and they don't pick up, and you're like,
Yeah.
yes, I did my bit. I phoned them. They know it. I know it. We both know it.
Yeah,
Just
what's
like
even
that.
worse is when they ring back and then you don't pick up, and then it balls in your court again.
Oh God.
Yeah. Uh,
El Clasico.
so that's been pretty good. And yesterday morning, I actually fulfilled a teenage dream of mine.
Oh God.
I, I bought myself an Alienware gaming PC.
Why?
So you know, okay. So for those unfamiliar, Alienware is like a brand that's now owned by Dell, but like they've been around for years, and like they make very kind of gamer type desktop PCs with like all of the, the powerful processors and the graphics, but the Alienware aesthetic is very much like colorful red lights everywhere and just like looks very kind of teenage gamery. And when I was young, me and my friends at school, we used to go to the computer room and spec out like an Alienware desktop PC to be like, and salivate over it, be like, oh my God, one day when I make money online, I'm going to buy this £5,000 PC. Oh my God, it's so cool. You can add these lights to it.
Yeah.
And so that was my whole vibe. And, when I used to kind of make money from like either birthdays or my part-time job, I would fantasize about one day getting an Alienware PC.
Yeah.
And I know that for you, the fantasy used to be, how many monitors can I buy with this money?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like one day I'm going to have 3 monitors on my desk.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking of building a gaming PC because I've been getting back into World of Warcraft recently and it's sick. And then I was speaking to a friend of mine, and apparently the NVIDIA 3080 graphics cards are really out of stock everywhere. And so I looked at the Alien website and I was like, oh, this is actually reasonable. It looks pretty sick. And it saves me from just having to actually buy the parts and plug them in myself. So I ordered a Alienware gaming PC, and it's arriving in a month's time. So
A month? Bloody hell.
I know.
How did it feel? Did it feel as magical as 12-year-old you would have thought?
Um, I'm not gonna lie, I'm actually pretty excited about it. I'm
Wow.
like more excited about this than I was about like the Tesla, for example.
Okay. Yeah.
I just don't routinely get excited by purchases, but this has genuinely been exciting.
Why? Like your current thingy World of Warcraft setup, the graphics are probably decent, right? Like, is it gonna
Oh
be?
no, I'm playing on the lowest graphic settings.
Oh,
In fact,
okay.
I was doing a 5-man dungeon with my guild the other day, and there's this there was this like section where you have to walk through this pipe essentially, and there's this like thing that sprays oil at intervals, and you have to kind of walk through it without getting hit by the oil. And and like twice, I walked in, I got hit by the oil, and I fell off, and I had to run all the way. Wasted 5 minutes running all the way back. Second time, they were like, right, Stella, that's like my uh, username. Please don't get hit by the oil. I walk in, I get hit by the oil. And I'm like, where the hell is this oil? And then the third time around, I was like, right, guys, describe to me what this oil looks like. They were like, it's literally a huge mass black of oil that's like spraying on your screen right now. And I was like, oh, my graphic settings are so low that I did not see, like, I literally could not see the particles of oil because I was playing on the lowest graphic settings. And then I turned them up to medium. I was like, oh, okay.
Oh,
I can see I know what you mean now. Like, obviously, I should have avoided that. It's like literally black oil spraying across the whole screen, but I couldn't see that on the low graphics. So, partly,
that's so
it'd
funny.
be nice to play WoW on a higher graphics, but also because I've been doing streaming a lot on Twitch and like streaming and gaming from the Mac Mini at the same time. It's just a
Yeah.
very kind of choppy, laggy kind of streaming experience.
Yeah.
And, because I care about the fans, I thought, I need an Alienware desktop gaming PC. So,
That sounds funny.
yeah, that's what's been going on in my fun employed life. What's going on with Causal these days? You guys have just closed another round and you're hiring more people or something like that?
Yeah, we're now we have someone joining on the business side of things, so sort of working closely with me this week on like Thursday or something. And then we'll be like 6 people full time. Yeah, I think we're off to the races. We just need to start selling this thing. I think we know who we're trying to sell to. I think the product is ready. Yeah, we're just gotta grind it out and start making some money.
So when you say someone is being hired on the business side, what does that mean?
Uh, I mean, their title will be, I don't know, like head of business operations or something.
Okay, but like, what does it actually mean?
It means kind of doing, in the same way that I do a little bit of everything. They'll kind of be taking a lot of that stuff off my plate, and so that means like, we do a bunch of like cold outreach to companies that we try to sell to, and so there's some stuff to do around that. When we're actually selling to someone, we need to like show them a demo of the product. Then if they're interested, we do like a pilot project with them where we sort of help them build some causal models so they can get a flavor for what it's like. And so actually like managing and running these pilot projects takes a decent amount of manpower to kind of plan the sessions and so on. And so this person will kind of be managing the pilot side of things as well. And then there's just a bunch of other tasks that currently Lucas or I are doing. For example, legal stuff, finance stuff, just like, yeah, general day-to-day operations of a company that that this fellow would be doing as well. So yeah,
Oh,
it's basically like a bit of everything.
nice. I feel like I should hire a head of business operations. That sounds pretty sweet to be able to offload like finance and stuff.
I mean, look, the finance and legal stuff is not huge for a company like ours. We're pretty small and it's pretty simple. I'm particularly looking forward to this guy joining because he actually used to be one of our customers, so he really gets the product. He has been a buyer of the product before, so he gets why someone might buy it, how you might want to sell this thing, and so I think yeah, it's just like the perfect profile for this kind of thing. Just has like a ton of context about what we're trying to do and kind of deeply understands and cares about it. So I think it'll be nice to be able to offload a bunch of mental sort of headspace onto him and sort of trust that kind of he'll do a great job, basically.
Yeah, it's quite nice when you can do that. It's like I have that feeling with like Angus and Elizabeth for the part-time YouTuber Academy. It's like I just know that it's just so nice to not have to think about it 24/7
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and offload that worrying about it to Angus, who then thinks about it 24/7.
nice.
So it's a
Yeah,
very liberating feeling. So thank you, Angus, for that.
yeah. I think it would be nice to offload some of this operational stuff to someone else who can focus on it, so I can then think about other things 24/7.
Like what's happening with David Dobrik these days.
Yeah, did you hear about that?
Mate, I've been following with like
Following
at the
eagerly.
edge of my seat every time there's a new like H3 podcast episode, sort of deconstructing the situation and
Oh, are you watching the like analysis of
yeah,
videos as well? Oh,
yeah, they're
really?
quite good. It's quite interesting. Like there was one, yeah, there was like the 1 hour long interview with Jeff Wittick, and I just found myself watching the whole thing, obviously at double
Wait,
speed.
who interviewed Jeff?
Um, Ethan from that H3 podcast.
Oh, okay, I don't know.
Oh, you haven't heard about this? Like Jeff, like famously went on this podcast where Ethan and Tasha, I think, or whatever her name is,
Trish.
Trish, that's the one.
Oh,
They like deconstructed him and basically wrecked him on live on air because it was a live podcast recording, and and he was like complaining about the article that was written by Business Insider, and he was
is that why
complaining
he took
about
his
like
apology video down?
uh who Jeff.
Yeah, because he made one apology video and then he took it down and then he posted another one saying, "I'm sorry for the first one."
Yeah, so in the first one, he said that look, this isn't what it looks like. Trish and the author of this article are trying to smear people, and this is just not legit, and I had nothing to do with it. That sort of thing. And then when he was on this live podcast with these two people that really knew what was going on, he kind of folded like a cheap. What's the phrase? Folded like a cheap suit. Yeah,
Is
that's
that
the
a
phrase.
phrase?
Yeah, yeah, it's a thing. Folded like a cheap suit. And turns out he hadn't actually read the article. They were like, "Well, have you actually read the article?" He was like, "Yeah, I've read bits and pieces." They were like, "So you haven't read the whole article?" And he was like, "Well, no, I didn't want to do the paywall." And
Wow.
we're like, "Right. So this article that you're complaining about, that you made a video about, you haven't actually read the article, and you're attacking the author of the article. Okay, fine." It was a bit of a train wreck, but kind of interesting to watch. It's weird. Like I don't normally engage in sort of keeping track of YouTuber drama, but I guess because I've been watching David for such a long time, mostly thanks to your recommendation, I have to add
Yeah, it's
it's like a
interesting, but it's
different level of interest.
uh, I don't know. I think partly I don't want to like engage too much with making with I think people are making quite a big spectacle of what is actually like a really serious issue, and it's almost become like a reality TV show
Mm.
that people are watching just to like get the dirt and get the gossip and get the drama.
Oh yeah,
When
absolutely.
when like I think it's quite a serious issue, and I don't know. I feel weird about like indulging too much in in kind of I guess the sort of Schadenfreude of it, right?
Yeah, fair play. I don't feel worried about that at all. So I've been indulging myself quite a bit in the Schadenfreude.
All right, so I thought this week. Do you know what episode number last week's episode was?
No,
It was 100.
was it?
Yeah,
Oh, great. So we had Joey on episode 100.
yeah. So I thought, given that, I think we were vaguely planning to do like a reflection episode for episode 100, but then we kind of lost track. So for episode 101, what we're going to do is a little reflection on the podcast so far.
When we started this, when did we start this? We started this like this time 2 years ago, I think. Like March of 2019 was when we started this.
Yeah, I remember we were in France and we recorded a couple of episodes while we were on a little family holiday.
Yeah, I think for the first few episodes, it was quite good and it was easy. And then we go to a point where we're like, oh crap, like we have to figure out what to talk about each week. I think there was a period then where I was a bit like, oh, this is too much effort trying to figure out what to decide what to talk about each week. Especially because this was kind of the pre-pandemic where I'd be coming home for the weekend to record the podcast, and I'll have to go back to work on the Monday, and we'd often end up recording at like 11 p.m. at night, and then I'd be like sleep deprived for work the next day. So
Yeah.
like all of that led to me being quite like annoyed that the podcast was a thing, just because just because of the the logistical issues associated with it. But like recently, since we've been recording remotely, it's actually great. I just got to sit at home, have a bit of a chat with you, and I think we've been less high pressure about like, oh, we need to have a topic this week, and we've been more okay with just kind of shooting the proverbial shit, as it were.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah,
I
I
don't know.
think that I think that's interesting and worth digging into. Like, because I think, yeah, I used to get sort of worried before every episode of like, oh, this is going to be the episode we have nothing to talk about. This is going to be the beginning of the
Mm,
end or something.
yeah.
But I think we kind of got over that maybe like 50 episodes ago or something.
Mm.
Yeah, how is there always something to talk about?
Like sometimes there really isn't, but we just kind of have a bit of a chat, and then there's always going to be something, right? Like, I think before I, I think this has a lot of parallels with YouTube videos, where I think the parallel with YouTube videos is that with a YouTube video, you kind of need to have a title and you need to have a thumbnail. And the title and thumbnail is like ridiculously important. And that really sells the value of the video. You can't just make a video being like, let's talk. Wait,
You can't.
David Camp. And so for me, like topic selection for YouTube is like a really big thing just because title and thumbnail is so important. I think for a podcast, you can literally just have an episode where it's like, you know what, let's have a chat and we'll figure out a title later. And the title is in a way a lot less important. It doesn't feel like we need a topic. But also it's not really a themed podcast. If it was like, I don't know, the Smart Passive Income podcast or like the Indie Hackers podcast or like the Video Creators podcast, it's like that has a very specific value proposition. And so each episode needs to have a specific value proposition. Whereas this is just, I don't know, just listen to us have a chat for the most part. And occasionally might be something that you find interesting. So I think that framing of it also makes it a lot easier to just hit record and talk. And occasionally I get emails from people who want to start podcasts, and they have this thing of like, how will I keep on doing this? And my advice to them is always like, A, don't do an interview podcast because then it's reliant on you on getting guests every week. And find someone who is find someone that you're like friends with, or like a family member or someone who will show up for this week after week, because it just makes it infinitely easier to keep the consistency going. And there are those stats that like most podcasts don't go beyond episode 3, and of the ones that do, most don't go beyond episode 20.
Really?
And so
I didn't
just
know
the
that.
fact that you go beyond episode 20 means that your podcast is in the top X% of podcasts that actually survive.
I think another sort of thing that's really helped is just, I think it's fairly low friction at this point. Whenever people, whenever like friends or whatever ask about the podcast, I think a lot of people assume that it must be a lot of work. Like, man, you must have to spend so much time setting up and editing and uploading, and it's yeah. I mean, I think it's just super low friction. We got like the mics sort of permanently set up in my room. The camera is like permanently set up in a corner of my room. It doesn't move. I don't use it for anything else these days. It doesn't move. And so recording the podcast is just like sitting down, turning your computer on, and then you're done. Um, I mean, I guess we used to do the editing ourselves in the early days, which was, I mean, very light editing. It took what, like 15 minutes or something to click a couple of buttons to remove the pauses and like compress the thing and upload it. I guess you know Angus does the editing now. I don't know how much work that is. I imagine it's about the
Yeah,
same. Maybe
I
I'm being presumptuous.
I think the fact that it's a video thing, like, and because we're turning it into clips, means the workload is fairly high. I think it takes like half a day on a Monday to do it, or sometimes on a Sunday if Angus chooses chooses to work the weekend. um, so Riverside, what we're using to record this, also has this new like magic wand feature where it just creates a video recording for you, um, that you can just chuck on YouTube if you want. So maybe there's some like, I think the more we've done this, the less friction it's become. And I think that's also partly because the tools have evolved. Like there was no Riverside or Zencaster, or even like Zoom wasn't really a thing in 2019. And so when we would record remotely, it would be like we'd be on a FaceTime call and we'd sort of be
Yeah, we
recording
had like a
locally with
Skype
Logic and
plus FaceTime or something stupid like
yeah,
that.
a
Yeah.
really weird kind of janky setup. But now it's literally Riverside.fm, one click, and you go and you're sorted. Um, Full disclosure, I'm an investor in Riverside. Is that what they say?
Yeah, I think that's what people say.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think more people should start podcasts. Like the issue with a podcast is that it's basically impossible for it to grow, and the only way podcasts grow is by the medium of video. Like weirdly, like there is almost no point in starting a audio podcast,
I mean, that's not true. That's just obviously not true.
isn't it?
I mean, most podcasts are audio only. Plenty of
Yeah,
people
but
listen to
I
them.
mean, like if someone listening to this were to decide, you know what, I want to start a podcast, it would be a bad idea for it to be audio only, given the lack of shareability of audio only podcasts and the super abundance of them. I feel like at least amongst everyone I know who does podcasting and takes it seriously, it's table stakes at this point to have a video podcast.
I agree, but I think the key there is takes it seriously. I think a lot,
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah, if you want to do something as a hobby, then you can do what you want.
yeah, I think that's the position most people are in. I don't think most people
Yeah.
are looking to start podcasts as like a serious money making activity. And I think I'd like the video just adds a lot of overhead. It does add friction. And if the bar is like, oh well, it's pointless to start a podcast unless you also film it and put it on YouTube, then
Okay, sure. Yeah, it's pointless to start a podcast with the intent of taking it seriously, unless you're going to film it and put it on YouTube, or unless you're already a big name, unless you're someone like Chamath whatever his name is. If you have a lot of other unfair advantages stacked in your favor, then sure you can get away with audio only. But I think the way the world is going, the way a podcast grows is through video these days.
yeah, there's just no way to distribute audio generally.
I think that's an interesting one. This difference of like taking it seriously versus not. Like we often run into this issue with our part-time YouTuber Academy, which has just wrapped up its second cohort, where the course is designed for people who want to take YouTube seriously. It's not designed for people who want to do it as a hobby. But but even so, a lot of people sign up who want to do it as a hobby and don't really have an intention to quote take it seriously. And it's hard to get that balance between like what advice do you give to, because if someone wants to start YouTube as a hobby, the advice is okay, do whatever you like. Like, what are you here for? Like, why do you care? Like, if it's just a hobby, then why do you care about growth and stuff like that? But then there's also like, well, it's a hobby, but I also do care about growth. But it's not like I care so much about growth that I'm willing to sacrifice A, B, and C. And it's kind of straddling these kind of trade-offs versus here are the things you could do. And the way that I think about this, and I explain on the course, it's like a metaphor of stacking a deck. And so you've got this deck of cards, and if you're playing a card game, it's all kind of probabilistic. Like there are no guarantees of quote success, whatever that means. But there are ways to stack the deck in your favor. And you can stack the deck in terms of time, or you can stack the deck in terms of money, or you can stack the deck in terms of systems. And the extent to which you want to stack the deck in terms of time and money, that's sort of just depends on what your goals are for YouTube. If you want to grow to 100,000 subscribers in a year or a million subscribers in a year, there are things you have to do. Like you can't just half-ass it and expect to do okay. I got an email from someone the other day saying that, hey, so you talk about starting YouTube. If I were to do YouTube for 1 hour a day for the next 2 years, can I make a full-time living from it? My answer was like, no, obviously not. That's like 7 hours a week. How on earth can you have the audacity to expect a full-time living to come of that in 2 years' time? That's just never going to happen. It's just not a
Yeah.
thing. And so if that person has goals for YouTube involving, I want to make a full-time living in 2 years, then, there are certain things that have to happen to stack the deck in your favor. Whereas if you're like, oh, I'm just kind of giving it a go, see what happens, then sure, do what you like. I think it's similar for podcasts, for drawing, painting, any creative thing, any business thing as well. I was speaking to someone yesterday who is starting a SAT test prep business. Naturally, I was discouraging her from doing this because I felt it would be a total waste of time. But her thing was that, yeah, no, I can see that this is probably not going to be market viable, but it will help me. It will help teach me to code, and it'll help me learn skills about how to start a business. I was like, okay, yeah, that's completely fair. Starting a test prep company is a very reasonable way to learn how to code and to learn how to run a business. So
Yeah.
it really just goes down to what are your goals for this thing. I think partly because like our goals for this podcast have been very modest, which is why it feels so chill to record a podcast episode. Whereas if we had goals that, this podcast needs to make a full-time living or something like that, then we'd be doing things probably with a bit more pressure and a bit differently.
Really. I think I wish we'd started doing the videos a lot sooner. We only really started that, I don't know, like 3 months ago or something.
We had been recording them for some time before then.
But it was
Which is
kind of it was kind of
it was
shitty,
kind of
right? It was
rubbish,
just
yeah,
on
recording on
your
our
one
phones and
phone or something,
yeah.
you know. I mean, yeah, what would we be doing differently if we were like taking this more seriously? I don't think we'd be doing that much differently.
I
Maybe
think
we'd be a bit more serious about like,
I think in terms of topic generation and like titles, we would have been taking things more seriously. We would have done video a lot sooner because like we knew it was a thing to do video. We would have done clips a lot sooner. We knew that was a thing.
yeah,
Like it's a lot of the stuff that we did later on because we happen to have the manpower to do it. That if we were taking it seriously from the beginning, we would have done it sooner. We would have done the whole kind of figuring out target audience, value proposition. Like we did this in a very kind of half-assed fashion. Like, you know what? Let's just slap something together and see what happens.
this target audience and value proposition thing. I'm skeptical of this for a podcast like ours. Even if you narrow down some target audience, like how does that help you?
It helps you in a way.
We're not running LinkedIn ads over here, like
It's helpful when you're creating any kind of content, or when you're trying to serve anyone to know who are the people you're serving. Like, if for example this podcast were aimed at, I don't know, 13-year-old kids living in the UK, it would be a different sort of podcast. If it's like if it's a podcast aimed at 45-year-olds living in the US, it's a different kind of podcast. And so we actually do have a target audience in mind. Usually for us
do
as
we?
people, yeah, it's just like implicit rather than explicitly stated. And it's usually kind of people like you and me who are interested in the same kind of stuff that you and me are interested in. And
I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm trying to target those people. It's like, look, I think for some podcasts that are about more concrete, narrow topics or whatever, yes, it's fine. Like the My First Million podcast, they probably intentionally target it at people, aged 20 to, 20 to 40 who are kind of into tech or whatever, right?
yeah,
But if you think about, I don't know, something like Conan's podcast, I mean, maybe they're deliberately targeting it at some people behind the scenes, but I imagine Conan's podcast is just like, hey, we're gonna we're gonna like do this podcast. We're gonna have these actors and stuff on, and we're gonna have a chat. And I imagine they have a pretty good idea of who watches it. Like they probably know, okay, there's not many 80-year-olds watching, watching Conan on TV or listening to the podcast. But I don't think like, I think for a general podcast like something like Conan's or like ours,
yeah.
I don't see how this target audience thing is relevant. Like I can see it for your YouTube. Like if you're making study videos, yes, fine. Obviously there's a target audience in mind. If you're making productivity videos, again, yeah. But for this, I really don't see it.
Like, so my point is that if we were taking the podcast quote more seriously, we would sit down and actually think about this, that okay, who is our who is the sort of person who will scream about the podcast from the rooftops? Like, if we had to boil it down to a single avatar,
Yeah.
then what would that person look like? Like, for example, with my YouTube channel, yeah, there's a lot of people who watch it, but like if I had to boil it down to a single avatar who would scream it from the rooftops, I call that avatar Medic Mo. This is like a sort of 20-year-old medical student, probably in London, probably interested in tech, probably wants to learn to read more, probably pretty bad at managing his time, probably cares about like how to study, but not so much to the point that he cares about ranking first in his year. Probably, enjoys video gaming once in a while, probably wants to improve his social skills, probably enjoys board games rather than going to the club.
Yeah.
And these sorts of things, like it sounds like a sort of BSE kind of exercise, but actually just taking the time to think about this and deciding, okay, who is this person? What's their vibe?
Yeah.
And even if it might not change things immediately, like it wouldn't change the things that we talk about. Just having that in mind, helps with topic generation because you can think, okay, what are the sorts of things this person would be interested in, and it also helps just targeting things at the appropriate level of like abstraction or like complicatedness, like you explaining maths concepts. If our target audience avatar was like someone who's a math student, you would assume more knowledge than you would otherwise. But we know that our target audience is not people under 13, for example. Therefore, you don't have to explain basic maths. You can assume a certain level. So in a way, we are doing it implicitly. But most people would say, and I would agree, that if you take the time to define it explicitly, it just helps you think about this in a more systematic way.
I find it hard to imagine what we might be doing differently if we came up with this persona. Just give me one tangible thing we might do differently if we came up with
I mean, we haven't come up with a persona, therefore it's hard to like the point is in coming up with the way we're approaching this podcast is like we'll sit down and we'll figure it out as we go along. That's fine. That's a totally reasonable way to do things. But if we were taking it more seriously, we would sit down and figure out, okay, who are the people watching this? Let's look at the stats and let's see where they're coming from. Let's see if there's anything we can glean from the audience at large. We would probably be doing things like, marketing companies do these like surveys where, you know, what sort of topic would you like discussed on the podcast? Or when it comes to socializing with friends, what's your biggest challenge? Or what's something you often think about? What's something that keeps you up at night? Doing some level of market research around that would, I imagine, give us some ideas for topics. But we just never done that beyond our kind of Not Overthinkers Slack group. We just never really done that. And if you're taking, for example, the YouTube channel seriously, it's the sort of thing you would do.
I think it also depends on where you are on the spectrum of like pure art slash self-expression to like, pure, I don't know what, pure pandering, you know?
But
And
even
like,
thinking about that and defining it up front, or defining it at some point is helpful.
yeah, potentially. Fine. I'm still skeptical, but whatever. Have you had any real life repercussions of the podcast? I guess the podcast is much smaller in audience than your YouTube, so I imagine any real life repercussions would have already come from the YouTube.
There've been a couple of times where I've run into people on the street, and they say, rather than "I watch your videos," they say, "I listen to your podcast."
Hmm. Yeah, I've had that a few times.
They often followed up with, "Oh, your brother's really cool."
Really?
No,
Yeah, I haven't had that one.
um, you've had a fair bit of like, because I guess this podcast is the most public thing that you do.
Yeah.
So what's that been like for you being a podcaster celebrity? Yeah, people slide into the DMs because they've heard you on the pod.
Yeah, I get a lot of DM slides. I do get a lot of DM slides. But most of them are sort of not very actionable. I think the podcast audience is fairly international.
Mm.
And so if it's a DM slide from someone across the other side of the world, then, what are you going to do about it? If it's a DM slide from someone, in the geographical vicinity, then I have met up with people occasionally. Like I went on a coffee date last week with a podcast listener, a DM slide. It was nice. I think just getting like unsolicited messages in general, like even if it's not a DM slide, but just a general like message or whatever. I think that's an interesting thing. It's particularly interesting when people like really open up about really personal stuff, just like in an email to you or like in an Instagram DM.
Mm.
I think getting recognized on the streets and stuff is really overrated. Previously, you might think that, oh man, it'd be so cool if like you get recognized on the streets and people come up to you and stuff like that. It's okay. Like I think it's neutral. I think like yeah, it's nice that like people care and stuff, obviously. But it's also weird to be perceived by other people, Do you know what I mean?
Weird to be perceived by other people.
Yeah,
What do you mean? Like it's weird that they have this image of you and will, in a way, pedestalize you almost, or what?
it's weird that they have an image of you that you're not really in control of, and that you have not really played any active role in. You know, I still find that strange.
Yeah, I mean the getting recognized on the street thing, like it's kind of cool in a way, but it's also often I feel a bit awkward in those situations where like the thing I enjoy is having a kind of long conversation with someone. And so if it's a coffee meetup, like I do my when it's not lockdown, my weekly coffee meetups in Cambridge, and those are great because we'll sit in a coffee shop and chat for like anywhere from 1 to 6 hours, and that's
Mm.
just fun, especially when there's more than one person, and then the the group becomes just more engaging when there's more than one person.
Yeah.
Um, so that's really cool. But if it's like oh hey, I watch your videos, or hey, I listen to your podcast, it's really good. It's like, oh thanks, cool, nice to meet you. That sort of thing.
Mm.
Especially if like I'm in the middle of something or I'm with other people, there's only so much you can be like, oh, how did you discover? Let's have a chat while my friends are waiting. Oh, should I introduce you to everyone in my friend group? Oh, this is Catherine, that's Lucia, this is like Marcus. It's just a bit weird.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
where does that interaction go from there? So I think it's been good, like podcast plus YouTube channel, in that the coffee meetups are great, but the random people coming up to you in the street is it's kind of cool, but it doesn't really. I don't think it adds a particular value to my life, and probably not to theirs. I don't know. Maybe it would to theirs. I suspect not. But I think we should definitely do more like it would actually be quite fun to do like a podcast listeners meetup in London or something
Yeah, for sure.
once
Yeah.
stuff finishes.
Yeah,
Bit of
defo.
dinner or something, just like we're gonna book out like a Nando's, a table for 20, first 20 who want to book on Eventbrite or something. Here's a link.
Right, yeah.
Um, One thing I wanted to ask you about, like, how has your so when we started the podcast, no one really knew who you were on the internet beyond like tech Twitter to an extent. And so
Right.
you wouldn't have got that many like Instagram DMs of random people like or emails from random people like asking for stuff or saying that you're amazing, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Now, and over time, as the podcast has become more popular, you would have gotten more of those. So how
Yeah.
has your attitude towards them changed over time?
What are you trying to get me to say here?
I'm really curious. I wanna understand the diminishing returns from your perspective.
Okay, yeah. Look, so there's definitely diminishing returns. I think the first few times it's like, whoa, this is so cool. Like random person on the internet, has like listened to hours of the podcast and they really like it and this is really cool. I think the thing to understand is that I don't like to be praised. And a lot of these outreaches, they're sort of reaching out to sort of share that they like the podcast. And then there's typically some kind of praise involved.
Yep.
And I'm not really into that. I think I don't feel much when I read some messages that I
Mm.
get, but sometimes I do feel something. Like when we read reviews, for example, with a lot of the reviews, right? Like I don't really feel anything, but occasionally someone will touch on something
Mm.
that I don't know think is really really cool or really good, or that I want people to touch on, and then I'll feel something. Um, Let me go through some reviews. Okay, so the praise that I do like is when I'm called funny, and we've talked about this before.
Mm.
I think it's a different category of praise. It's a group project, and so when I get messages saying that I'm funny, then that feels good. I think messages that say things like, the podcast has made me think more about like X, Y, and Z. I think I feel something with those.
Mm.
I think messages that say things like, me and my friends like listen to the podcast and we like talk about it and stuff.
Mm.
I think I feel something from those. So I think I feel something when I am convinced that there has been some kind of impact, and B, it's the kind of impact that I personally value.
Mm.
Now, when people say something like, well, if there's a review or an email saying something like, "Oh, this is so insightful. I learned so much." That goes in one ear out the other. I'm not at all convinced that they're getting anything from it. and you know, if there's messages around like, yeah, I'm like, I think I'm, you know, it's making me more productive or something. I just don't buy it, you know. So I think if the message is aligned with what I personally think is
Mm.
valuable, and if it's like convincing,
So if the message says that this podcast has helped me connect better with my fellow man, you'd be like,
yes,
yeah, I'm all over that. The message
yeah,
is this podcast has made me more productive. You'd be like, oh, God,
yeah.
fair play.
I also think that for some of the diminishing returns come from the fact that um, I think people, you know, if you're sort of consuming content from someone, typically if that someone is like older than you, then I think there is a tendency to, yeah, I think if you're like a teenager and you're watching YouTube videos or listening to a podcast from someone who is like, you know, one stage of life ahead of you. So like maybe a few years older, maybe they're at university and you're at school, or they've graduated and you're at university or whatever. I think there's a tendency to kind of almost seek out role models or something and turn people into role models in a sense. And I think in a lot of the messages, I think it's that kind of dynamic where it is, you know, someone at school or university, sort of, you know, one stage of life earlier than you and I are, and I think in those instances, it feels like a very general like, yeah, I don't think we're doing anything differentiated in those instances. I think like, you know, anyone who is, you know, 3 to 6 years older than this person who films himself on a YouTube video or on podcast, they would probably, um, I don't know, maybe ascribe it more value than it should be ascribed.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, I'm often surprised when I'm often very surprised when people say they learned something from the podcast because especially when it's the episodes where you and I are just having a chat. If we're like reading out Agnes Callard's book, then okay, you know, it would be reasonable that you would learn something from it. But if it's the you and I having a chat episodes, which is most of them, and people say they've learned something from them, I wonder to what extent. I occasionally wonder this for my YouTube channel as well. Like, what's the distribution of people younger than us versus people older than us who feel like they've actually learned something from a podcast episode? And I think disproportionately it's people younger than us who will, like, we're just kind of chatting and kind of thinking out loud. And it might come across to someone who is not thinking very critically about what we're saying that, oh, these guys know what they're talking about. Yeah, that sounds legit. Cool. Yeah. And just sort of a tendency to agree with what's being said. Although I don't think this is a particularly young person way of looking at the world. Like, I often find myself doing this when I'm reading books now. Just like, I'm kind of thinking that sort of on one hand I'm reading the book, and on the other hand I've got this routine running in my head of like, okay, have they constructed this? What's their argument here?
Yeah, yeah.
And I normally just don't think like that. It's only since I've started writing a book that I now start thinking in a more like, what's actually being said here? Like, do
Mm.
I actually agree with it? Like, how have they phrased this? And like, does this sound
Yeah,
legit?
yeah,
Whereas otherwise, be like, cool, cool, cool. Yep, yep. Highlight, highlight, highlight. And it could all just be horrible. But
yeah,
like, the fact that it's in a book, I
yeah,
would just take it at face value.
yeah, yeah.
And I think if I were to be watching a YouTube video from someone older than me, talking about like some skill that I think that they are legit in, I would take it at face value as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's basically what I was trying to get at, where
Sort of agreeing by default.
agreeing by default and like viewing us as some kind of authority just
Yeah,
because we're a bit older.
yeah. Or like on the internet.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of that probably goes on. And yeah, I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, I
And
think
this is not to like I don't want this to come across as like patronizing towards audience members who are younger than us because I think everyone does it. I think it's like a really natural thing to do.
yeah.
My point is basically that when I think that's what's going on, then it's like, okay, I don't really feel good about that because I don't feel like I'm actually doing anything there. I feel like you know,
Hmm. Do you feel it's because a lot of the stuff we talk about are in areas? So for example, when I get a message from someone saying that your videos about study tips changed my study life around, and now I used to be a C student and now I'm an A student, that actually feels pretty good because I feel like okay, you know, there was no original thinking in these study videos. Like I was literally just presenting scientific research in like an accessible format on YouTube. But the fact that it's made a difference in this person's life is like quite nice. But I think that's a very specific type of I am presenting myself as an authority in the space. And if you listen to my advice, which is actually the advice of lots of scientists and stuff, and your grades improve, then that's kind of cool. But that's not really the vibe we have in the podcast.
mm,
I feel like if someone says, I really learned a lot about kids, you'd probably feel better about that because this is something that you care about, that you feel more of an authority in than like the average person on the street who does not really think about kids that as much as you do. Equally, I imagine if someone listens to, like, you've played the consistency episode, episode 2 or whatever it was, to friends, and they've said, "Oh, this has actually helped me and made me start a blog," and that sort of
yeah,
thing. I
it's
imagine that feels good as
putting
well.
yourself out there.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that feels great. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if like someone engages with like the kids stuff or engages with one of my, you know, one of my what I would consider to be original theories on life, I, it's always really nice when someone specifically has engaged with that because I feel like if I get a message that they've engaged deeply with like one of these things that I really care about, then I think there's much less chance of it being a generic structural relationship of like I'm just like some slightly older person on the internet who happens to just record himself, and therefore people happen
yeah,
to listen to me and take me seriously for some reason. I think yeah, I think that is probably the bulk of the diminishing returns,
mm,
where a lot of the messages, I feel like if I were replaced with someone else who's roughly my age or something, then this person would probably lap up whatever they're saying as well. um, and I don't know, maybe I shouldn't care about that. Maybe I'm being like really egotistical here. That I need to be some kind of special snowflake that's
yeah.
providing truly differentiated and unique value that no one else can provide. Maybe that's not a good thing.
I don't know. I think maybe you're over indexing on the age thing as well. Like, I think for a lot of people, they actually don't think or care about how old someone is. Like, people who don't know, I suspect that the fact that you are approximately 25 years old is fairly irrelevant to 95% of the audience. And I suspect that 90% of the audience won't have even clocked that about what your age is before
Okay, yeah, I
we
think it's
mention it
more
on this episode.
yeah, I think it's more of a bracket thing. Like anyone from like 18 to 30, or oh yeah, anyone up to the age of 30
Mm.
might plausibly see someone who's my demographic as being a potential authority on things, and the fact that you know I'm on a podcast makes them but just by default sort of think take me seriously on things.
Yeah, I guess so. But I think it's also like there's a danger to not like people have agency. Like if the stuff you're saying doesn't vibe with them, they'll leave a 1-star review saying, I don't know, two rich boys talking or whatever, and then not listen to the podcast again. Whereas the people who are listening are not listening because they think you and I are authorities on anything. They listen because presumably they get some kind of value out of the stuff that we talk about. Um, and yeah, I think like on the age thing, I'm quite sensitive to the age thing because I thought it was like quite a big deal when writing my book that like why would anyone want to listen to what a 26-year-old has to say about like life advice? And everyone's been like, yeah, but like no one cares or no one knows or cares how old the author of a book is. Like, no one knows that James Clear is like 33. It's just like not a thing that anyone would even think about. He could be like 21 for all anyone cares. The fact is that it's a good book.
Yeah, yeah,
And sure, when you see him on a video, he looks like an adult. He doesn't look like some 12-year-old kid. Therefore, he not naturally has some authority. But for the most part, people who read Atomic Habits and the 3 million copies it sold is not because they've seen a photo of James Clear. It's because the ideas in the book are interesting and people share the ideas.
yeah.
And so I've, yeah, I, I'm also particularly surprised when I find that there are people older than me who watch my YouTube channel and get value from it. So I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of nice. Just because my default assumption is that only people younger than me will look up to me as any kind of authority and think my stuff is worth anything because of that age situation. But
Yeah,
the fact
yeah.
that people older are also getting value from it makes me think, oh, maybe there is actually value here, and it's not, you know, maybe the fact that I'm older than the person watching the videos for the most part isn't really a factor that plays into it. I think maybe what's going on here is that if it's a conversation where you and I are just having a chat and shooting the proverbial shit, if someone then says, "Oh, that was insightful. I learned a lot from that conversation," maybe it feels like, oh, I mean, maybe there's a sense of, well, we were just kind of shooting the shit. Like, there must be something else going on for you to think that was worthwhile, rather than the fact that it was actually worthwhile.
No, I don't think that. I don't think that. I think I don't have any qualms about shooting the shit episodes. I think a lot of good stuff comes out from them. I think there's a lot of insight in the shooting the shit. So I don't find it. I'm not skeptical when someone claims to find value in the shooting the shit episodes.
Hmm.
Actually, here's another thing that I think contributes to diminishing returns. I think a big part of why people. Okay, let me speak for myself first. I'm a fan of the All In podcast with Chamath and Jason and David Sachs and David Friedberg, right? Big fan of the podcast. Everyone loves this podcast. It's just so good, right? Now, I listen to every episode, and I don't think I've learned anything that I could recall from these podcast episodes, right? I'm pretty. I know why I listen to the episodes. I listen to the episodes purely for the vibes. It's four guys who are really close mates, bantering around. Yeah, sure, they're talking about tech, they're talking about politics, they're talking about current affairs. I don't care what they're talking about. It's four dudes who are just vibing and bantering around, and they know each other really well, and it's good vibes, and it's like it's nice to just listen in on that. In the same way that you know, I I think I've said this before about David Dobrik's vlogs. It's just vibes in a can, it's canned vibes where you just watch this thing for 4 minutes and you just like soak in the vibes. And I suspect that is a big part of why most people like this podcast. And I think it is a easy trap to fall into, to think that, oh yeah, I'm learning something from this podcast or whatever. Oh, there's so many insights, whatever. When actually it's just like raw entertainment.
Yeah.
And mate, raw entertainment is fine. Like I think like as I've said before, I think you know comedy is the only worthwhile thing to do in life. But yeah, if someone if I yeah if I get a message of like, man, it's just like great vibes. I just listen for the vibes. This is raw entertainment. I'll be like, hell yeah, love it. I'd feel good about that.
Yeah.
But I think yeah, I'm just skeptical when yeah, I feel like that's most of what's going on, and most
Mm.
people are not aware of that, and they are maybe deceiving themselves or whatever.
Mm.
That there is something else going on.
So it's like me playing World of Warcraft for the vibes and pretending it's for my hand-eye coordination.
Right? Yeah, sure. And look, I'm worried about. Look, I'll be honest. I'm worried about how I'm coming across here. Look, yeah,
Mm,
it probably comes across that like Taimur was just basically saying like a big fuck you to the audience, and he's like, you know, stripping them of their agency and assuming
mm,
their intentions, and you know, assuming that they don't know, whatever. I'm okay. As I've mentioned on previous episodes about other topics,
mm,
I am speaking at a very low resolution here. I'm speaking in terms of like large structural effects that I think go on. I'm not speaking about any particular individual saying that this is what's going on. I'm just saying these are large structural effects. Similar to, I mean, yeah, we talked about this on the episode with Joey, right? Similar to, saying that Ali, you should wear a black t-shirt when you go on a date. You're talking about some, a very like low resolution structural thing that you think is a contributing factor to something. You're not saying that like the person I went on a date with last week, only likes me because of my black t-shirt. So yeah, I just want to do some
mm.
hedging there.
Nice. Yeah, that's good hedging. Worth adding that in. So we started off this kinds of conversation talking about diminishing returns. Um,
I mean, yeah, I've talked about mission returns for me. What are they for you? And I appreciate that if it were the case for either of us that actually we felt absolutely nothing whenever we read any of these messages, it's not
mm,
something we'd say on the podcast. So
mm. Yeah, I mean, for me, I kind of lump comments about my YouTube channel and comments about the podcast in sort of the same category of comments from the internet.
okay, yeah,
And given there are like 1,000 a day of those, it's very hard to feel something for everyone. And for the most part, I feel absolutely nothing for the vast majority of these comments.
yeah,
It's just like the ones that comment on specific things, as you said, are the ones that kind of go through the noise. So, for example, if someone says I'm funny, I always take that as like the biggest compliment, just because it happens so rarely. Uh,
yeah,
if someone says that, oh, those biceps are looking good, I often take that. I often take that as like, oh yeah, this
yeah,
feels good because this is literally something I'm working towards. If someone says I really like the way you talk, I quite like that because I'm like, oh, that's kind of sweet. If it's a comment around something very specific, like I did a video the other day talking about like my toxic relationship with productivity. Hashtag clickbait title. But there were quite a few comments from other YouTubers who commented on that, saying that, oh wow, this is exactly the stuff I was feeling, and he really articulated what I was thinking, and
mm,
that kind of stuff feels good. But often, like, I find myself doing that thing when I'm on the toilet where I'll look through my 99 plus Instagram DM notifications, look, flick, and just sort of at a
yeah, yeah,
glance take in what the message is saying.
yeah,
If
yeah,
it's like a long wall of text, I'll like do a thing where I'm like, okay, because now you can see if they've got like 3 followers and 3 following, then chances are they're not particularly active on Instagram. I can probably discount most of what they're saying, and I'll have a quick glance through it to see, okay, anything interesting here? No, okay, move on, move on, move on. Occasionally there is something interesting, maybe one every 30 messages, where if like especially if it's for example someone who's gotten into medical school and they're saying thank you, and then I'd reply to that, be like, oh, this is amazing, this is kind of cool. If it's comments about the study stuff, I reply being like, oh, that's cool, thanks. But yeah, for the most part, it is like a flick off, like, and it's just like, in a way, I often feel kind of bad about it, especially because like an Instagram DM that is not a reply to a story is like something that someone's gone out of their way to do.
yeah. It takes effort to
It
do
takes
that.
us, it's taken like them some level of time and effort to do it, especially if it's like a long ass email, and we get like 50 plus long ass emails each day, where people have gone out of their time to really articulate for 2 pages what problem in life they've got. I just like, okay, cool. Yeah, this is way too much to deal with. Ignore, rather than, and even attempting to reply to that would take up half an hour of my time, which just
Yeah,
isn't
yeah.
feasible. And so
Yeah, I
that's
think
also
I
running in
think
the background.
the tragedy is that the long, thoughtful messages are the hardest to reply to, and they're the
Mm.
least likely to actually get a
Yeah, it
reply.
was like, what's your keyboard? It's like I've got a snippet for that.
Yeah,
I can reply in like literally for like 2 milliseconds while I'm on the toilet. But if it's a long, thoughtful one where the question is not entirely clear, and we're like, oh, I don't know, so I'm kind of rambling, just wanted to get your thoughts on the above. Well,
oh, yeah,
what thoughts on the above would you like me to share? It's like actually impossible.
yeah. I think Instagram have also missed a trick here because when a message is in the 99 plus requests tab, it takes bloody four taps to actually respond to it. You have to click
Yeah.
once to accept the message, and then it does some, and then you have to like wait like half a second or a second for it to like put it into your general tab, and then it like switches to that, and then you tap to like enter into the text box, then you type your message, then you press send. Like it takes so many clicks to to respond to a single message in the requests folder or Instagram DMs. Whereas if it was like, like the YouTube, I don't know what the app's called, Creator app or something, where you can see like all the recent comments on your
Yeah.
videos and stuff. That is really good because you just see this list of comments. You can literally like double tap one to like, you can like just go through and, if it's a sort of comment just saying, oh, I love the video or whatever, you can just like click like. And so you can actually respond to all of these people. Whereas with Instagram, they just make it so hard. Like, I
Oh,
could
great.
I could feasibly just go through and like all these Instagram, messages or
Yeah.
whatever, and then the person knows I've read it. They know like I liked it or whatever.
Yeah.
It'll just take too long because Instagram has like five walls up before you can actually do that to a random
Yeah.
message.
And then as soon as you accept a request, then it's in your general tab, which means that the filtering process is no longer
Yeah, yeah,
there in the
yeah.
future.
Now this
And so,
person has unfettered access to
yeah,
to your
exactly.
inbox. Yeah,
There's no way to reply to them within the request thing,
yeah,
or
yeah,
even double tap their message because yeah, it's a real problem Instagram. That's why I kind of like Twitter. Like it's very easy to engage with people on Twitter.
yeah.
Drop them a cheeky like, check the mentions occasionally. Anyway, my vegan jackfruit biryani has arrived
Really.
just now, so we should probably wrap this up.
Oh, yeah, there was another thing I wanted to mention, which is a really cool aspect of having a following, which is that you can poll people. I think polls are
Mm.
so underused. I did a poll on Instagram and on Twitter yesterday, asking people whether they felt respected by adults, appropriately respected by adults when they were a kid. And on Instagram, 2/3 of people said they mostly did not feel appropriately respected by adults. And then I got like a ton of DMs, kind of people sharing their stories and stuff. And some of
Yeah,
these are like really personal, intimate things. And that's
yeah,
just so cool. It's so cool to be able to just make a freaking Instagram story
mm.
and then like, yeah,
Yeah.
get all
People
this
will reply to
data
it.
and like get all these anecdotes. Yeah, it's just like it's unbelievable.
Mm.
Why don't you do more polls?
Oh, it's on the cards. It's
What do you mean it's on the cards?
it's on the cards when it comes to like book stuff.
Why don't you just do it randomly when you're thinking about something?
Oh, I
Like,
mean, I often do.
oh, okay.
Um, but yeah, it's definitely on the cards with the book stuff in particular because I think I was very much overweighting kind of a scientific study, and then my writing coach was like, "Look, people only do scientific studies because they haven't got an audience to ask, and so you have to do an ethics committee applications, create a questionnaire, and then recruit like 1,000 students from the general public." But he was like, "You can literally do that with the type with the type of a few clicks on Instagram. So why are you
Yeah,
looking
yeah,
for
it's
that?"
nuts. Yeah.
And I was reading this book. I'm reading this book called Bullshit Jobs, which is all about like meaningless jobs and stuff. And most of the stuff in that book is this guy wrote an article about it in 2013, and then thousands of people emailed him with stories about their BS jobs, and
Mm.
it's just so entertaining hearing real life stories. And it's not like you know filtered through the lens of like a scientific study where someone has transcribed an interview. It's literally an email being like, "Oh my god, I read your article. It resonated so much. This is how bullshit my job is. This is what I have to pretend to be doing."
Yeah.
It's freaking hilarious. I love it. And I'm thinking, damn, I really should do more of this kind of polling stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild.
Like
Also,
one thing that would be nice. It would be nice if it's like the balance between friction for the end user versus friction for me. Like if I do a poll on Instagram and or if I ask a question, it's such an absolute nightmare going through the results. If I do like an assumptions or a Q&A, we literally have to go through, scroll through on Instagram, screenshot, adjust the screenshot, save to
yeah,
photo,
yeah, yeah.
repeat. If there was a way to export a CSV, then that would be completely game changing. Maybe someone should make this. Someone should say you should be able to log in with Instagram. It looks through your story replies, and it just exports the text as a Google Sheet or something, or as a causal model.
You can
That would be a
actually
good
you can
invention.
actually export all of your Instagram data as a JSON file, and then you can probably just go through that JSON and like
Really.
figure out what
So
you need to
even
fetch.
if I put like a question on Instagram and people reply to it,
I don't know what.
yeah,
Yeah, I think I imagine every like object in this JSON thing will have a timestamp, and so I imagine you can just find all the replies that you got after a certain timestamp, and then you'll have those in a structured format, and you can almost guarantee that these are replies to your story or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Anyway, final thing I wanted to just mention before we end the episode. The highlight of my week this week was going flying with friends.
Oh, how was that?
It was sick. It was so
Great.
cool. So this friend of mine has been into flying for, I don't know, the past 10 years or something, and he has his own plane at a local aerodrome, I think it's called. And so we just like rocked up, and I thought it's gonna be like one of those things where, you know, there's a bunch of red tape. You're gonna have to go through some health and safety bullshit. They're gonna have to like kit you out in some kind of kit or something. There's gonna be like an hour of bullshit before you actually get in the damn plane. There wasn't. Just like parked the car in the car park, walked up to the plane, took off the cover and like got inside, and he like explained how it all works and stuff like that. And then once we were actually in the air, this was crazy. I'd never felt sort of. It had been so long since I'd felt any kind of thrill or adrenaline. But basically, you can do this thing where if you go like really sharply upwards, I mean that just feels like a roller coaster. It's just like going really sharply upwards, and you kind of feel the g-force of that. And so that itself is terrifying. And I just think, I think that was the first time in a long time that I had a sort of uncontrollably like screamed as a response. Like just like completely involuntary response. And I think yeah, very few things actually make you do that. And then you can do this thing where if you then descend at the same, you know, at roughly the same sort of acceleration as gravity, then you sort of feel this sort of zero G kind of thing. You sort of feel this sort of weightless thing where like if you're holding your phone in your hand, the phone will just kind of stop floating, and you'll kind of
No.
just like stop floating. I mean, this is how zero gravity flights work, right? Like you can pay a bunch of people to take you up in a plane, and they basically do this thing where they go up really high. I mean, not necessarily really high, but then you kind of go down.
Accelerate upwards with the same rate of.
Yeah, you accelerate upwards. You just need to get to a point, and then you accelerate downwards with the same acceleration as gravity, and then you feel weightless.
Okay. You accelerate downwards with the same acceleration of gravity.
Sorry?
How does that work? Surely it's accelerate upwards while the gravity is pointing you down.
No, if you're accelerating upwards, you'll just feel like the G-force of being like rammed into your seat. Because
Okay.
yeah,
Oh, okay. I got it. If you're accelerating downwards, it's as if you're in free fall.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Fine. So what does that feel like?
It's just so cool. It's so cool. It's like so cool. Yeah, and then I actually like sort of flew the plane, like took the joystick and like flew around. Yeah, apparently once you're up there, there's not much that can go wrong. Like
Mm.
even if I like ran the joystick all the way to the side, like nothing's gonna happen. Like it's all good.
Okay.
So it was just really cool.
So does your friend own the plane or does he rent it or how does it
No,
work?
no, he owns the plane. Apparently he takes it to Austria fairly often. And yeah, apparently if you own a plane, you can just like show up and fly your plane to anywhere in Europe basically, and as long as you have somewhere to land, it's fine. And so, well, apparently when you're going to Austria in your own plane, once you've taken off, then you just kind of leave it on autopilot for it takes like 4 hours or something, and
Yeah.
then you could just like recline your seat and watch Netflix for 4 hours or something, and then you'll just fly to
No way.
Austria. Yeah,
That's ridiculous.
it's nuts. It's like a self-driving car.
Yeah. What and you can just do that. You can just so I could learn to fly. I could just get a plane and just like fly to Austria whenever I want.
Yeah, literally.
That's ridiculous. That's got to be a life hack that very few people have explored.
I think there are cost limitations to this life hack. Yes, but yeah.
How much does a plane like that cost?
Sorry.
How much does a plane like that cost?
I think sort of planes of sort of hobby kind of planes, you know, range from like I don't know 40K to I don't know freaking I'm sure like millions.
So 40K is sort of low end of that's quite expensive.
I think so. I think 40K is like a really basic, really low end plane that could fit two people.
Damn. That's expensive.
And then you need sort of like 40 hours of flying lessons, which are like 150, 200 pounds an hour or something.
Mm.
And then you need to pay you need to pay rent to whatever runway you store the thing at, which is a couple of £100 a month. The fuel isn't that bad. The fuel is like not very expensive. Yeah.
Mate, we should start flying lessons. That'd be so fun.
Yeah, I was thinking of getting into this a couple of years ago. Yeah, I think when in 2017, when my Bitcoin did really well, I was like, all right, time to ball out. I'm going to start flying lessons. I didn't get around to it. But yeah, I think it's more doable if you co-own the plane with some friends. You don't need your own plane just for you, right? Like if you and 4 mates or something co-own the plane, and you kind of spread the cost of the plane and the rent and all that kind of stuff. It's actually pretty cool.
Nice. Okay, I'm gonna ask if you can buy a plane as a business expense. Okay, this is interesting. That's cool that you had that experience.
It was great. Yeah.
Cool. Great stuff. Do you want to wrap things up with a review?
Yeah, let's do it. All right, this is a 5-star review from Hackrover in the Czech Republic. They say, "This is the only podcast I have not stopped listening to, despite not really being into this sort of thing. I get easily irritated just because someone's voice doesn't suit my preference, or simply because English is my second language and my attention span is very short. However, I'm happy to report that both of you are amazing, and I can only imagine what it would be like to have chats with you as friends. Smiley face. Keep up the great work."
Oh, that's very sweet.
It's a nice review. Thank you for that.
Very nice review.
Thanks everyone for listening to this reflective, fairly self-indulgent episode of the podcast. And we will see you next week.
Or in other words, just the podcast. So we'll see you next time. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening.
If you like this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the Apple Podcasts website if you're not using an iPhone. There's a link in the show notes.
If you've got any thoughts on this episode or any ideas for new podcast topics, we'd love to get an audio message from you with your conundrum, question, or just anything that we could discuss.
Yeah, if you're up for having your voice played on the podcast and your question being the springboard for our discussion, email us an audio file MP3 or voice note to hi@notoverthinking.com.
If you've got thoughts but you'd rather not have your voice played publicly, that's fine as well. Tweet or DM us at @noverthinking on Twitter, please.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.